Hi guys, welcome back to the House of Devlin. I'm Big Al Devlin, and this is a continuation of our Nordic paganistic playlist series that I have here on the House of Devlin. And today's video is a video that is going to be focusing on part two of a discussion of the god Loki. Now, when I bring up the term or the god Loki, I could start by telling you guys the stories of Loki, what he did, what he didn't do, so on and so forth. However, if I was to do that, I would run the risk of blindsiding you guys because if you didn't read in between the lines of the stories or you didn't see the overall sort of intention behind Loki's actions, you would most definitely 100%, like the mass majority of people, see Loki as being what essentially you could describe to be as a bad god, perhaps an evil god, even if evil, good. These are not terms that are often used within polytheistic religions. They are considered too simplistic to describe something like a god. They're either creative, destructive, or have bits in between. And more likely or not, they're a bit of everything, okay? But you'd have most definitely 100%, more likely or not, and I could see reasons why if you were to argue, well, I see Loki as this for this, this, and this. You would have him labelled as one of the destructive gods. Why? Well, the main reason, of course, is because he brings along Ragnarok. He is the one with the most blame placed upon him for Ragnarok occurring. In fact, he was responsible for Ragnarok occurring. For those who don't know, Ragnarok is Viking apocalypse, and in the Viking apocalypse, basically what happens is the forces of destruction, or the forces of utangard. The term utangard is given to those that are destructive in nature. The forces of utangard overwhelm those that belong to the forces of innagard. Innagard being those who are creative, civilized, have a sense of justice and nobility. All the good aspects, so to speak. The members of the forces of the innagard are completely overwhelmed, and basically most of creation is destroyed by the Utangard forces. Now, it doesn't stop there because, of course, like everything within Viking belief systems and Nordic paganism, everything is a cycle. Creation can often lead to destruction, but destruction will also lead to creation. And so when everything is destroyed, or almost everything is destroyed, the survivors, the few elements of the cosmos that do survive the forces of Ragnarok, create then the new world, the new realms, the new people that populate whatever realms exist at that point. The new gods are born, so on and so forth, and so creation begins anew. And so, as a result, the argument is there immediately already. If your argument is to say that yes, Loki was the one who brought along Ragnarok, and as a result, he must be definitely part of the Utangard, i.e., the chaotic or destructive parts of the gods. I would say, well, Ragnarok is like fate. It is fated. It's destiny. That everything that is born, be it man, woman, beast, god, or even the universe or the cosmos itself, will eventually at one point die. That is the Nordic paganistic belief. That is the way they see the world, and I see the world. Everything that is born is fated to at one point end. Now, you can escape that fate of death, but as sooner or later, there will still be death at one point or another. It's just at that point, then you're in control of your own fate, and so you can, determine perhaps the day that it occurs. But on the cosmological side of things, yes, Ragnarok may be possible for example, to delay it, as Odin tried. Maybe Odin was successful. Maybe Odin delayed it for a very significant period of time with his attempts. But it is an unavoidable fate. It's like, for example, it's like jumping off a very, very tall building, the Empire State Building, for example, where it's going to take you quite a long time to reach the ground. As you fall, you know your fate. You know the end point is that you're going to hit the ground and you're going to die. Well, that point where you hit the ground and die, that's Ragnarok, ultimately. And the force pulling you towards it is, in this case, gravity. But if the end point was Ragnarok, the force pulling everyone and everything within the cosmos towards it, that force would be described as fate, or sometimes destiny, or both. Fate and destiny are dragging you towards this final destiny or this final fate, which is Ragnarok. Now, of course, you may try to change that fate, but ultimately, because it's such a strong force pulling you downwards, there's nothing you can really do. There's nothing you can do. You can try and slow it down. You can try and change direction as best as possible. But the ultimate end is going to be splat if you've jumped off the building. And the ultimate end is going to be Ragnarok. It always will be. For example, if you were to, considering the one jumping off the building, you could flap your arms like wings. It might do something. Who knows? You might slow down a little bit, but it doesn't really matter what you try to do. You might, you might lie outwards, like you see the parachutists do, to slow down. But it's not going to stop you falling. It's just going to slow it down. And the same thing happens with Ragnarok. As I say, Odin was obsessed with trying to stop, or at least the very least, slow down the chances of Ragnarok occurring, and he may have had a great effect. Who knows how great an effect Odin has had on Ragnarok, and whether it will occur or has occurred, or how long, what it gets confusing at this point. But Odin's effect on trying to delay Ragnarok may actually be quite significant. We don't know as men, because our lives are so finite. It doesn't really impact on us so much. But regards to the discussion of Loki, blaming him for something, as I say, that is completely 100% unavoidable. Yes, delayable. Yes, you can delay it. Yes, you might alter the circumstances in which it's initiated, but can you avoid it? No, it's completely unavoidable. You cannot blame Loki for Ragnarok, even though he was, or has been prophesized as being the cause of Ragnarok, or the starting cause of Ragnarok, the most influential force in causing Ragnarok. You can't blame him for causing it. It was going to happen anyway. If Loki never existed, it would still happen. Ragnarok would still happen, in one form or another. And so, it's putting blame on someone for something that is generally not their fault. Yes, they were involved. Yes, they did contribute towards it. But ultimately, it's still not their fault, because they could have been, to take a Christian phrase, for example, a living saint. Literally, he could have lived. He could have been the best God ever. He could have been, involved in humanity. He could have helped the gods at every turn. It wouldn't have mattered. Ragnarok would still have occurred. And so his actions are so insignificant in comparison with such a massive event like Ragnarok, so which would have a destiny or a fate. So, the force pulling you towards that would be so unavoidable that, there's nothing you can do about it at the end of the day. So, blaming him for that is, first of all, wrong. The other things he did, well, he was a mischievous god. He did play pranks. He did do stupid shit. during the tales of the Nordic people, and I will tell you the stories. I endeavour to tell you at least the first of the stories in the next video, or at least one of the stories in the next video, or maybe even two of them, depends how long it takes to tell the stories, and do like analysis of them and all the rest of it. But despite that, as I say, it even though I will be telling you the stories, oh, my memory's gone. I do apologise this week. My memory's been very bad. I suffer from amnesia, so I do bear with me, guys. I will get back on track. But ultimately, basically, what I was trying to say is that you can't blame Loki for Ragnarok. And even though, yes, he was mischievous and did stupid shit in his life, when he came to doing important stuff, the bits that mattered, whether he did good or bad, his intention was always pure. He always had the best interests of his people at heart, and he always did the action that he thought would bring about the best reaction. Now, you've heard that term, it's only human, to potentially fail from time to time, ultimately. And with Loki, it's very much the same thing. Even though he had the best intentions, he sometimes messed up. And so, actually, as a result, I would very much argue, because his intentions were always pure, at least that I'm aware of anyway, because his intentions were almost considered pure in regards his love for his people, at least anyway. He was very much of the innagard, of the ordered, of the just, of the noble, of the creative, because his intention was of the innagard. Okay, now he may have his effects of being of the utangard, but he was very much placed very firmly within the innagard, and he was placed within the innagard, and I'll tell you the reasons why. Because he was part of the pantheon of the Nordic gods. He lived within Asgard, Asgard being the most ordered realm of all the realms, out of all the 9 realms that existed within Viking cosmology. He lived in Asgard, and he wouldn't have been tolerated unless he was ordered in his own sense. As I say, he pissed them off from time to time, the other gods, and they did from time to time ask Odin to either exile him or execute him and all the rest of it, and Odin refused. He always found some other punishment, and that punishment was rectifying his mistakes. He said, well, if you fix things, if you rectify your mistakes, if then and then the gods forgive you, then that will be your punishment. That will be your atonement, so to speak, the correction of your mistakes. And that's often what happened. Now, I do believe there's more behind it than that. Odin was the wisest of all the gods, and even though he tried to fight fate, I believe that was his stubbornness, because being the wisest of the gods, he should have known that fighting Ragnarok, trying to stop it, was a futile attempt. He continued to try and stop it, or at very least slow it down, because, well, that's what Vikings do. You die with a sword in your hand. You don't just give up and roll over and die. You keep trying and trying and trying until either you succeed or you die, ultimately. That's the Viking way. That's what he expected of his mortals that followed him. He would be a hypocrite not to do it himself. And so that's why Odin kept trying to alter fate as best as he could to avoid Ragnarok, because one, it was of a selfish act, I suppose, in many respects. He wanted to try and preserve his life and his kingship, his rulership of not only Asgard but Midgard as well, and all the realms of creation. But he also wanted to protect his people also, just like any good king would. He wanted to protect them. He didn't want them to die. He didn't want Ragnarok to come and destroy everything. And so he would have tried his best to protect his people, but how can you defeat something that cannot be defeated? As I described earlier, the force dragging you towards Ragnarok is so profound, there's no way to avoid it. But regards his tolerance of Loki, well, Loki, as I've described in part one, my insight, my belief is that he may have been born because his mother is of an unknown origin. He may have been born of the Norns. His mother may be in a Norn, or may have been a creature related to fate very strongly indeed, because the one thing about Loki is his actions. His actions impact very heavily on fate, much more so than even like gods like Odin and Freya, for example. Every time Loki does something, it impacts on fate very, very much. And it impacts on fate in such a way that it pushes fate towards the direction where fate should be going, towards Ragnarok. No matter what Loki does, he draws all the gods and himself, because he dies during Ragnarok, he draws himself and the other gods and the realms and that towards their ultimate fate. And so that's why I do believe he was a child of a Norn. And I do believe that because Odin was so wise, that he must have understood that Loki was a child of a Norn, and that he was related to the fates to some degree, because of course the Norns aren't ruled by fate like everything else. They write fate. They're not. They don't have fate ruling over them themselves. When Ragnarok occurs, the Norns are still there for creation to start anew, and when life forms re-enter, the new realms, what exists of the realms, and population begins again. They are there rewriting the fates of new creatures, of new gods, so on and so forth. And so the only real eternal constant are the Norns themselves. And so Loki, possibly being born of them, I don't think Odin would, one, challenge the Norns in such a way to execute one of their children, but also, as well as that, he understands that fate is, you cannot defeat fate, and that Loki played, or had a role to play at least, regardless of his mother's origin. Even if his mother was just some random Aisha goddess, it didn't matter. He would have seen that Loki's fate was to bring about Ragnarok, and that Ragnarok was an unavoidable fate. And so he tolerated him because he saw himself, just like the Nords saw utangard, or elements of utangard, as just simply a necessary evil, something that is positive in small amounts and something that must exist as long as it's controlled. He would have seen this Loki as the same. As long as he controls him, then there's nothing too wrong. It's only when he gets out of control that, and the forces of Isengard as a result grow stronger. That's the only point when Loki could be considered, perhaps a bad god in many respects. That Odin had failed to control him. Maybe he kept him along because he wanted to control him. If he could keep him within the innagard, maybe that was his ultimate weapon against fate, against Ragnarok. If he could control Loki in his wisdom, if he could control Loki and prevent him from causing Ragnarok, not by execution, because fate's a weird one. If he executed Loki, someone else would be fated to bring it along, or it would just happen itself. He would have learned and understood when he gained the ability of foresight, with his rune sight as well, and with his shamanistic magic, and all the other skills and talents that he had. He would have understood that Loki was the bringer of Ragnarok. And what better way to control Ragnarok and prevent it happening than having the cause of Ragnarok on your doorstep, controlling him, keeping him on the path of innagard, so to speak, keeping him Well, he only had one eye, but within one eye, close within an eye's, well, essentially keeping him within arm's length, so to speak, keeping one eye on him at all times, which, as I say, is all Odin had anyway. He only had one eye, so keeping his one and only eye on him the whole time. I think that was Odin's ultimate plan, to control Loki, because if he controlled Loki, he controlled Ragnarok. That's my further insight into Loki anyway. But the main point that I wanted to make, as I say, that I made earlier, is that Loki's intentions were always, almost always, pure of intention. And so he's not an evil god. He does not bring about Ragnarok because he's an evil god or a bad god. It's because it was unavoidable anyway. He was just the one fated to do it. And you can't be blamed for that. It's like blaming gravity for, pulling you downwards. It just does it because it does it. And as I say, when things really matter, he does have love for his people, and he tries his best for the people. He may fail, but he tries his best, and so that makes him a god of the innagard instead. 100%. I'm 100% convinced that Loki really is an innagard god. He is a ordered, civilized, good god in many respects. He's not chaotic, he's not wild. He's just impulsive, impetuous, and at times he fails. But that's it. Just my second insight into it, guys. My next video, I hope to share perhaps one of his tales, one of his stories, and we can look at that in detail and see how the points I've made already relate to the stories that I tell you. Or maybe you disagree, and we can have a little debate, and it'd be brilliant. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.